Two police cruisers came roaring down my ranch road, dust flying, lights flashing. I stood there confused until I saw her, Karen Mitchell, the HOA president from the neighboring subdivision, the woman who'd complained about everything from my fence color to the sound of my tractor, and now apparently my boat. I had just finished backing my brand new boat into the clear blue water of my private ranch lake, my lake, when she appeared behind the officers waving a clipboard like a badge of power. Her sunglasses reflected the flashing lights, and that smug little smirk told me everything she thought she'd won. Sir, one of the cops began, we received a report of an unauthorized watercraft violating community regulations. I couldn't help but laugh. Community regulations, I said. This isn't even your community. She didn't know it yet, but in just 30 minutes I was going to own hers. Before we dive into this wild HOA story, comment where you're watching from and what time it is. And don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable HOA revenge stories. I never imagined a peaceful life on a ranch would somehow drag me back into suburban chaos. 5 years ago, I sold my tech company and walked away from everything, the noise, the deadlines, the endless calls. I wanted silence. Solitude. A place where the loudest sound was whined through pine trees and the occasional coyote in the distance. That's how I found the property. 100 acres of rolling hills, old oak trees, and one sparkling blue lake that stretched like glass in the early morning light. The kind of place where time slowed down. I'd named it Clearwater Ranch. Fitting since I built the house right on the edge of the water with a wraparound porch where I could drink coffee and watch the sunrise burn off the fog. For the first few years, life was perfect. I planted a small orchard, restored an old barn, and got to know a few decent folks from the nearby town. The ranch bordered a fancy gated subdivision called Silver Ridge Estates. It had perfect lawns, identical houses, and a homeowners association that acted like the Supreme Court of suburban misery. At the center of that empire sat Karen Mitchell, HOA president, self-appointed guardian of neighborhood harmony. She was in her early 50s, always dressed like she was going to a board meeting, pastel blazer, pearls hair, perfectly sprayed into immobility. I'd only met her twice before the boat incident. Both times she made it clear she didn't think I belonged near her community. The first time was about 2 years ago. She came to my gate clipboard in hand and told me my gravel road looked unprofessional and set a bad visual precedent for residents. I reminded her that my ranch wasn't part of Silver Ridge Estates and never would be. Her smile froze. Well, she said, we still have to consider property value consistency. The HOA board is concerned. I told her the board could concern itself with its own lawns and shut the gate in her face. The second time came last spring when she tried to claim the narrow dirt road running along the edge of my lake was community access. She even posted a laminated sign that said, Silver Ridge residents only. I took it down, folded it neatly, and mailed it back with a short note. This road existed before your subdivision. Kindly stay on your side. For a few months after that, I didn't hear from her. I thought maybe she'd finally gotten the message. Then came the day I rolled in with my boat. It wasn't just any boat, it was the one I'd promised myself years ago. A sleek 28-foot base boat with a quiet engine and polished chrome rails. I bought it after selling my last company, share a little retirement gift to myself. It wasn't for showing off just peace. I planned to fish, explore the lake, maybe even take my nephew tubing when he visited for summer break. That morning the lake was calm. The air smelled of pine sap and sun-warmed water. I backed the trailer down the ramp I'd built with my own hands and smiled like a kid on Christmas morning. Then, out of nowhere, I heard tires crunching on gravel. I turned and there she was, Karen Mitchell, perfectly dressed as always, standing just outside my fence line with her phone pointed right at me. Morning, I said, cheerful enough. She didn't answer. She just glared at the boat like it was a personal insult. Finally, she spoke. You can't park that thing here. I blinked. I can't park my boat. On my own lake, it's an eyesore, she snapped. It violates our community's aesthetic standards. Your community, I asked. Karen, this is private land. Her nostrils flared. It affects our view, she hissed, gesturing toward the distant houses beyond the trees. We pay high property taxes for lakefront aesthetics. You can't just dump a commercial vessel here, I looked at the boat. It was spotless, shining under the sun, clearly not the eyesore in this conversation. You've got to be kidding, I said, laughing. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police and the county zoning department. Let's see how you explain this to them. And she did. Right there on speakerphone while glaring at me like she was single-handedly protecting civilization from chaos. Hello, yes, this is Karen Mitchell, HOA president of Silver Ridge Estates, she said in that clipped tone of fake politeness. There's an individual launching an unauthorized vessel on restricted water. Yes, I'm standing right here. Yes, it's disturbing the neighborhood. I couldn't help it. I started laughing. Not loud, but enough for her to notice. That made her furious. You think this is funny? She barked. I nodded. A little, yeah. 10 minutes later, I heard sirens in the distance. She folded her arms like a queen awaiting her soldiers. You're about to find out this isn't a joke, she said. As the patrol cars got closer, she straightened her jacket, fixed her hair, and stood tall like she was about to hold a press conference. I leaned against the truck, sipping my coffee, and waited. The cops pulled up, one older officer with kind eyes, the other younger and nervous, probably new. They stepped out clearly, unsure why they were there. Morning, gentlemen, I said, waving. You here for a fishing license check or what? The older one smiled politely. We got a call about a disturbance and possible zoning violation. Karen rushed over before I could answer. Yes, that man is operating an unlicensed boat on restricted community water. The officer raised an eyebrow. Restricted. Community water. Yes, she said, thrusting her clipboard forward. This lake is under the jurisdiction of Silver Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I could almost see the officer's brain short-circuit. Ma'am, he said slowly, this is private ranch property. The map shows I have documentation, she interrupted. Shared access rights under Environmental Code section. She trailed off, flipping through papers she clearly didn't understand. I decided to help. I pulled my deed from my truck's glove box and handed it to the older officer. This might make it easier, I said. You'll see my property line covers the entire lake and 300 feet of shoreline in every direction. He glanced at it, nodded, then looked back at her. Ma'am, this is private land. Karen's face flushed. Well, it's still unsightly. It ruins the view for homeowners. The younger cop tried to suppress a smile. That's not really illegal, ma'am. She spun toward me, finger pointed. You're intimidating the neighborhood. I'll be filing a complaint, I shrugged. File whatever you want, Karen. Her voice dropped to a hiss. My husband owns the Marina where you bought that boat. Maybe we'll make sure you never dock it anywhere in this county. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a boat. It was personal, maybe even territorial. And if there's one thing I've learned from business and life on the ranch, it's this: when someone tries to control what's yours, they're usually hiding something they can't control themselves. The officers, bless them, wrapped things up quickly. The older one returned. My papers muttered an apology and said, Sorry for the mix-up, sir. You're good here. Karen glared, speechless with rage. As the cruisers pulled away, she stepped closer to my fence and hissed, This isn't over. I smiled, calm as ever. Oh, I sure hope not. She had no idea that her little crusade had just sparked something I hadn't felt in years, the thrill of strategy. Because if Karen wanted a war over water, she was about to drown in her own reflection. Karen didn't show up for a few days after the police left, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd calm down. Maybe she realized she'd overplayed her hand. But people like Karen Mitchell don't back off, they regroup. And when they come back louder. It started with a letter. A perfectly formatted, self-important piece of HOA stationery left in my mailbox, even though I wasn't part of their HOA. At the top, Silver Ridge Estates Board Notice. At the bottom, a shaky signature that looked like it had been carved in ice. President Karen Mitchell. The letter claimed that my unauthorized marine vehicle was in violation of shared lake access agreements, and that continuing operations may result in legal action. I almost spit out my coffee reading it. The best part, it was signed off with, We appreciate your cooperation as we maintain the harmony and beauty of our community. My community. She really thought the lake, my lake, was hers to control. I ignored it. Then came another, then 3. By the 5th letter, I started keeping them in a folder labeled Karen's Greatest Hits. A week later, I caught her trespassing again. She was down by the water tape measure in one hand, clipboard in the other, muttering to herself. When I walked up, she didn't even look startled. I'm conducting a shoreline assessment, she said briskly. On whose authority, I asked. On behalf of the Silver Ridge Environmental Subcommittee, she said, as if that was an actual government agency. You mean your book club? I shot back. Her eyes narrowed. You think this is a joke, don't you? I think you need to get off my property before I call the sheriff. That did it. She stormed away, shouting something about violations and community aesthetics over her shoulder. The next morning, I found a laminated violation notice, zip-tied to my gate. It accused me of disturbing the visual harmony of the neighborhood and demanded that I remove the offending object immediately. the offending object being, of course, my perfectly parked, perfectly legal boat. That's when I started documenting everything: photos, videos, timestamps. I knew this was going somewhere. By the end of that week, she wasn't content with letters anymore. She started showing up with reinforcements. First, it was her vice president, a wiry man named Paul Decker who looked like he ironed his socks. He came by pretending to mediate. Then, the HOA's security volunteer, a retired guy with a walkie-talkie who seemed to believe he was law enforcement. Each of them left more paperwork, more empty threats. Then came the big one. Karen showed up again with 2 county code enforcement officers in tow. She'd filed a complaint, claiming I'd expanded my property, illegally built an unregistered dock, and polluted shared waters. The officers, polite, but clearly embarrassed, explained they had to inspect the site because of her report. "Mind if we take a look?" one of them asked. I smiled. "Be my guest." They spent 10 minutes walking around, checking property markers, reviewing the plat maps I kept in a folder. The younger officer finally sighed. "Everything checks out. It's all yours." I turned to Karen. "Told you so." Her face flushed bright red. "This isn't over," she said for the second time that month. I grinned. "You're right, it's about to get interesting." She glared at me, but before she could speak again, one of the officers cleared his throat. "Ma'am, unless you're a legal representative or co-owner of this property, you need to step back." Her voice went up an octave. "I am the representative of this community." "Of that community," I corrected, pointing toward her subdivision. "This is my land." The officers exchanged glances, muttered something about paperwork, and left. Karen stood frozen for a few seconds, trembling with fury before spinning on her heel and stomping away. As her SUV sped off, I noticed something new on the back, an emblem for Mitchell Marina and boating supply. Ah. The puzzle pieces started clicking together. Later that afternoon, I called the marina, the very one where I'd bought my boat, to ask about a maintenance appointment. The receptionist answered cheerfully. "Mitchell Marina, how can I help you?" "Is this the same Mitchell as Karen Mitchell?" I asked. A pause. Then, "Yes, sir. She and her husband Tom are the owners." Well, that explained everything. It wasn't about my boat. It was about control. My lake, my property, my boat, they were all threats to her little empire. I couldn't resist testing the theory. The next day, I took the boat out for a slow-spin camera, rolling drone following above. The sunlight bounced off the water like a mirror. I wasn't breaking any law, but I made sure to glide close enough that she could see me from her side of the fence. Sure enough, within minutes, she was out on her patio with binoculars, phone glued to her ear. I waved. That evening, she struck again. This time with something more theatrical. 2 HOA board members came marching down the fence line, holding a massive banner that read, "No motorized boats on community waters." They hammered it into the ground just outside my property boundary, close enough to be seen from my dock, but not quite trespassing. It was petty, it was ridiculous, and I loved it. I went inside, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and started planning. I wasn't angry, not yet. I'd dealt with people like Karen my entire career. They thrive on intimidation and paperwork. They count on you getting flustered, reacting emotionally, giving them something to twist. But I'd made my living outsmarting bigger sharks than her. So instead of yelling, I started digging. First, I checked the county property database. It was public record, easy to access. I pulled up her subdivision, her parcel number, and then bingo. The Silver Ridge HOA didn't own the lake. They didn't own an inch of the water. In fact, the legal boundaries stopped 50 feet short of my shoreline. I took screenshots, printed copies, and marked everything with highlighter. Then I went one step further. I checked the ownership of the marina, and there it was, Mitchell Marina, LLC, owned jointly by Thomas and Karen Mitchell. The record showed a business loan from a regional bank and 3 years of back property taxes. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. Now I understood the threat she'd made. "We'll make sure you can't dock that boat anywhere in this county." She wasn't bluffing out of ego. She was protecting her only source of income. The marina wasn't doing well. If I could make her look weak, if her authority cracked, her whole little kingdom might start to crumble. The next day, I drove into town and paid a visit to my lawyer friend, David Ross. We'd gone to college together, and he'd helped me close the ranch deal years earlier. I dropped the folder of documents on his desk. "You ever heard of someone trying to annex a lake by sheer attitude?" He chuckled. "You've got a HOA problem, huh?" "You could say that," I said. "And I think I just figured out how to make it her problem." He skimmed the documents, raising his eyebrows as he read. "So she's trying to bully you off your own water, and her business is hanging by a thread." "Exactly." He leaned back, smirking. "You know, you could probably buy the rope she's hanging herself with. That line stuck with me. Because in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was about principle. People like Karen rely on fear and fake authority to control everyone around them. But all it takes is one person who won't play by their rules to collapse their little empire. So I decided I'd play quietly, patiently. I started collecting more information, recording every incident, saving every letter. Because when I made my move, it wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be final. And somewhere deep down, I knew she'd never see it coming. I drove into town like I was going to buy groceries, but my head was full of numbers and names. The Mitchell emblem on the back of Karen's SUV rattled around in my brain like a loose-toothed Mitchell Marina and boating supply. If her husband owned the Marina, then every petty letter and taped-up violation suddenly made sense. It wasn't spite, it was survival. I parked in front of the courthouse and walked into David Ross's office with a coffee in one hand and a folder of printouts in the other. David ran a small firm, decent reputation, no nonsense. We'd been friends since college. He'd read my shareholder agreements back when I still needed them, and I'd lent him a favor or two when his kids needed extra baseball gear. He took one look at the folder and raised a single eyebrow that read, "Okay, what's the plan?" I pulled county records, I said. Mitchell Marina, LLC. Registered owners Thomas and Karen Mitchell. Business loan with Ridgeview Bank. Taxes delinquent for, get this, 36 months. David flipped through the bank filings with the kind of focus that made me trust him implicitly. If the Marina's been missing payments that long, the bank either restructures or starts foreclosure proceedings. Banks hate small business drama. They'd rather sell to someone who pays than manage a dock full of boats. Exactly. I spread the screenshots across his conference table, loan schedules, tax liens, an email thread leaked to the county assessor complaining about unpaid utilities. They've been using HOA pressure as leverage. Force owners to sell or pay the Mitchells for access. It's a protection racket dressed up as community standards. David kept reading. I could see the pieces slotting into place in his head. "Let me contact a friend at Ridgeview," he said. "I'll get a sense of their appetite to move." While he made the call, I told him everything. The letters, the banners, the trespassing, the way Karen had said in that clipped voice, she'd make sure I couldn't dock the boat anywhere in this county. I told him about the laminated violation and the way she gestured like a conductor leading an orchestra of petty officials. He clicked his pen and gave me a look that meant, "This is deliciously stupid of them. You want to make a move, you need leverage, and leverage looks a lot like ownership. If the bank is tired of Mitchell Marina's headache, you can buy the note and then decide how to proceed." It feels theatrical, I admitted, like something out of those courtroom dramas I used to secretly binge. But theatrics have a long history of working on petty tyrants. David smiled. Petty tyrants have a short attention span and a predictable set of moves. Once you take away the revenue, they panic. And panicking people make mistakes. He put me in touch with his contact in Ridgeview, not the CEO, just a mid-level commercial loan officer named Elaine who'd been at the bank long enough to have seniority but young enough to still want to make something of herself. Elaine didn't take long to get to the point. Mitchell Marina was on a short list. The bank had issued a notice of default. If nothing changed within 60 days, the bank would schedule an accelerated sale. "They're bleeding," Elaine told me over the phone. Late fees, missed property taxes, a lien from a local supplier. Plus, there's the little public relations problem with the HOA fights. It's more trouble than it's worth. We'd prefer an out-of-court solution. She was careful, measured. That was the scent of opportunity. If the bank wanted to be rid of the problem quickly, they'd sell the loan, or at least let someone else take it over. That gave me an opening. David and I spent the next 48 hours moving like men who knew precisely where the weak points were. We drafted a confidentiality agreement, pulled together funds, and penciled out several scenarios. Buy the loan and hold it quietly. Buy the loan and force a sale, or buy the loan and restructure terms to shame the Mitchells into stepping down. By the time the weekend rolled around, I'd wired a sum to a trust account that made my stomach do a little applause. It wasn't reckless. I'd run the numbers twice. But I remember standing in David's kitchen at midnight coffee, gone cold, and thinking how odd it felt to be using capital to solve an emotional problem. Business and emotion had finally met on the landing strip, and neither of them were willing to back down. The bank called at 9:12 a.m. on Monday. Elaine's voice on the line was brisk and professional. "We received your offer and recommend we proceed," she said. "We'll need a few more documents, signatures, and then the note transfer can be completed. We'll keep it discreet as requested." Discretion in this case was essential. Public knowledge of me buying Mitchell Marina's note would trigger a frenzy in Silver Ridge. Karen would smell blood. We wanted to take the power out of her hands quietly, like removing a loose tooth, without waking the patient. While the paperwork processed, David and I dug deeper into the Mitchells' business dealings. The more we unearthed, the more brazen their scheme appeared. Emails revealed that the HOA had a voluntary fund that Karen and a few board members used to pay local contractors for community improvements. The contracts were often awarded to companies owned by friends of Karen's husband, with invoices padded by 20 to 30%. Neighbors had complained quietly at first, but fear of retribution kept most mouths shut. Then there was the pattern: Karen would target homeowners who refused to sell or who resisted her guidance. The HOA would levy fines, create nuisance incidents, and make life miserable until the owner either sold at a discount or moved away. The Mitchells would tuck the properties into holding companies, flip them, and skim off profit. It was small-scale, ugly capitalism wearing a cardigan. The realization hardened something in me. This wasn't just about a boat or a marina. It was about a system of coercion that fed on neighbors' silence. It was about the kind of person who used a title HOA president to do things they would never do in the open light. I felt the familiar warmth of righteous anger, the kind you get when you discover someone is stealing your neighbor's dignity. When the transfer finally went through, Ridgeview confirmed that Ridgeview would assign the loan to my trust. I remember David drinking a sip of coffee, setting the cup down and saying, "Well, you've got the rope now." The metaphor, as blunt as it was, made me grin. Holding the note changed the dynamic immediately. Where before, they had leveraged fear of being unable to dock or sell, the Mitchells now faced the threat of foreclosure. The bank had wanted rid of the headache. I intended to make sure that if they wanted mercy, it would have a price. But I wasn't going to humiliate them publicly or burn them to the ground like some vengeful Greek chorus. My plan was simpler. Once they realized their cash flow was gone, they would be forced into decisions. They might offer to step down, make restitution, or accept terms that stripped them of authority. The kind of justice I wanted was restorative, not merely punitive. I wanted the community healed, not just the Mitchells broken. So I did the only thing that made sense: prepared my case and set the table. I gathered the documentation, made calls, and arranged a meeting at the Marina, ostensibly to negotiate the lake access issue. I invited a few HOA members I trusted to observe quietly, like unpaid jurors. If nothing else, they would witness the truth. As I left David's office that day, dusk laying itself over the town like a soft blanket, I felt strangely calm. The kind of calm that comes after you've finally chosen to act. The game was no longer entirely in her favor, and somewhere I knew Karen would be sharpening her tongue for the confrontation ahead. I also knew she had no idea which hand was now holding the keys to her kingdom. The morning I decided to make my move, the air smelled like rain and iron, that sharp, tense kind of air that comes before a storm. Perfect, I thought, because today the storm wasn't in the sky. It was coming straight for Karen Mitchell. I'd spent the last few days putting the finishing touches on what David and I jokingly called Operation Anchor Drop. The plan was simple but devastating. Buy the Mitchells' debt from the bank, become the lien holder on their failing marina, and then quietly, methodically let reality do the rest. We didn't need fireworks or headlines, just paperwork. By Monday morning, all the documents were in place. The wire transfer had cleared. My trust, Clearwater Holdings, was now the legal holder of the promissory note and mortgage for Mitchell Marina and Boating Supply. Translation: I owned their debt, their docks, and their sleepless nights. I sat on my porch with a mug of black coffee looking out over my still lake. My boat floated peacefully where it belonged, sunlight glinting off the metal hull. It was funny, really. Karen had called the police because she thought my boat was an eyesore. In 30 minutes, I'd made her marina my property. David had warned me not to gloat too soon. "Play it clean," he said. "You're not just proving a point, you're setting an example." He was right. I didn't want to destroy them out of spite. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to lose control, to be on the receiving end of power misused. So I called her. "Karen Mitchell," she answered, her voice tight and sharp. "Morning," I said cheerfully. "This is the man who apparently committed the grave sin of owning a boat on his own lake." There was a long pause. "What do you want?" "I'd like to resolve our property dispute," I said, putting air quotes around the words even though she couldn't see me. "Maybe clear the air." "How about we meet your place, the Marina?" The confidence in her tone was instant. "Fine," she said. "My husband and our attorney will be present." "Perfect," I replied. "Bring everyone you want." When I hung up, I couldn't help smiling. There's something profoundly satisfying about walking into a fight you already know you've won. The next afternoon, I drove to the Marina under a heavy gray sky. The air smelled like wet asphalt and diesel. Mitchell Marina sat on the far edge of the county's largest lake, a tired cluster of docks, half-empty slips, and peeling blue paint that probably hadn't been touched in a decade. A faded sign out front still read "Family Owned." Since 1992, I parked, grabbed my folder, and stepped out, just as Karen emerged from her office. She was wearing her signature pastel blazer, this time lavender, paired with a scowl. Beside her was her husband Tom Mitchell, a thick-set man with a sunburned neck and the permanent frown of someone who'd spent too long barking orders at underpaid employees. And of course there was their lawyer, a slick-haired man in a gray suit who looked like he'd been practicing smirks in the mirror. Karen greeted me with a smile so fake it could have been printed. "Well," she said, "I'm glad you decided to come to your senses." Tom crossed his arms. "Let's make this quick. You've caused enough trouble already." I nodded. "You have no idea." They led me into a cramped office overlooking the marina. Through the window I could see two boats idling in the distance, their reflections rippling in the dull water. The smell of stale coffee and mildew filled the air. Karen sat behind her desk, motioning for me to take the seat opposite. "Let's start with the basics," she said, pulling a folder from her drawer. "You've been launching and storing a motorized vessel in violation of Silver Ridge community standards. That's not permitted within view of HOA property." I raised an eyebrow. "My land isn't part of your HOA." Tom slammed his fist on the table. "Don't play dumb. Everyone around the lake follows the same code. You can't just break it because you think you're special." I looked at him calmly. "You mean the code you wrote yourselves?" Karen flipped open the folder dramatically, revealing a neatly typed settlement offer. "We're willing to avoid legal action if you pay a $50,000 environmental compliance fee for continued lake access," she said as if she were offering me a favor. The lawyer nodded. "A very reasonable solution. It ensures harmony between private and community interests." I couldn't help it. I laughed. A full, honest laugh that filled the room. Tom's face went red. "What the hell's funny?" "Oh, nothing," I said. "It's just I tapped my folder. You three are about to realize this meeting isn't quite what you think it is." Karen leaned back, folding her arms. "Really, because from where I'm sitting you don't have much choice." I placed my folder on the desk and slid out a single document. "Actually, I do, because as of yesterday morning, Clearwater Holdings officially purchased the promissory note and mortgage for this marina from Ridgeview Bank." Karen blinked. I kept my tone casual, almost conversational. "To put it simply, the debt your business owes, it's owed to me now." Her mouth fell open. Tom's jaw worked like he was chewing gravel. The lawyer frowned, flipping through the paper, realizing it was very real. "Impossible," Tom growled. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. And I did. "Here are the transfer documents." The bank was happy to let it go. Karen snatched the paper, scanning the signatures, her face draining of color. No, this can't." I leaned forward slightly. "Oh, it can. And it does. Which means starting today you have 30 days to either bring your accounts current or vacate the property. Otherwise, I initiate foreclosure." Tom's voice cracked. "You're bluffing. Try me," I said quietly. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the old air conditioner. The lawyer started sweating. Karen's hands trembled slightly as she set the document down. You can't do this," she finally said, her voice shrinking. "I'm afraid I already have." Her husband turned to her furious. "You said the bank was extending the loan," she stammered. They said." He slammed his fist again, rattling the desk. "Damn it, Karen." I stayed silent, watching their empire collapse right there in front of me. There was no pleasure in it, just a kind of poetic finality. Karen tried one last time to muster her composure. "This isn't over," she said weakly. "We'll sue." "Will, Karen," I interrupted softly. "You can't sue your lender for owning the note. And technically, since I'm now your lender, you might want to lower your tone." Her lawyer cleared his throat, muttered something about needing to review this development, and all but bolted from the room. I stood gathering my folder. "I'll give you both time to process this. I'm not unreasonable. You have 30 days to figure out your next move. After that, we can talk about management contracts, refinancing, or walking away clean. Entirely up to you." Tom glared at me with pure hatred. "You planned this." "Not at first," I admitted. "But you forced my hand." Sometimes bullies forget that the people they push around might know how to push back. I turned to Karen. "Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, Madam President." And with that, I walked out into the gray light. The wind picked up as I reached my truck, sending small ripples across the lake. I stood there for a moment, watching the marina sway in the water, its docks creaking under their own weight. It looked fragile now, like it knew change was coming. In the distance, Karen burst out of the office, shouting something to her husband I couldn't quite hear. Her perfect hair was frizzing in the humidity. Her world, her rules were slipping away one gust of wind at a time. As I started the engine, I smiled. For the first time since the day she'd called the cops on me, the air around that lake finally felt free. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over yet. Because people like Karen don't surrender quietly. They break slowly, and they make a lot of noise on the way down, and I was ready for every second of it. By the time I drove back to the marina 2 days later, the weather had changed. The storm that had threatened earlier in the week finally arrived, gray clouds churning above thunder, rumbling somewhere far off the air, thick with that metallic scent of rain. It was fitting, I thought. The final storm for the Mitchell's empire. David had advised me to keep things civil. Let them talk first, he'd said. Don't gloat. Let them show who they really are. That wasn't hard. Karen Mitchell had never met a conversation she couldn't dominate, or at least try to. When I pulled into the marina parking lot, her husband Tom was already waiting by the door, pacing like a caged bull. His shirt was untucked, and he looked like he hadn't slept. The family owned. Since 1992, sign behind him had started to sag one corner, broken loose in the wind. Afternoon, I said, stepping out of my truck. He didn't answer, just glared at me with eyes that looked more tired than angry. Inside, Karen was waiting, her lavender blazer traded for a deep crimson one like a general dressing for war. The lawyer was there again too, but this time he didn't look smug. He looked uneasy. A few other people were seated in the back, familiar faces from the HOA board. Apparently she'd invited her audience. I had too. 2 local homeowners I'd befriended during my time on the ranch, both fed up with her bullying, stood quietly near the doorway. They weren't there to fight, just to watch. Witnesses to what was about to unfold. Karen greeted me with a brittle smile. I assume you've come to reconsider, she said, voice cool as polished marble. I raised an eyebrow. Reconsider what? Our arrangement, she said, sliding a new stack of papers across the table. I had my attorney revise the agreement. We're willing to accept a smaller settlement, $40,000, for your continued use of the lake, assuming you remove the dock extension you built without HOA review. I didn't even look at the papers. Karen, I said slowly, this is your marina we're sitting in. You don't seem to understand what that means anymore. Her tone sharpened. I understand perfectly well. You think you can use that loan transfer to scare us. But we've spoken with our attorney, and we'll fight this. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He clearly didn't want to fight anything. He looked at me, then at her, then at the papers on the desk, as though wishing himself invisible. Tom spoke next, slamming his fist against the table. You think this makes you a hero, buying our debt? You're just another rich guy throwing money around. I kept my voice steady. You're confusing money with leverage, Tom. I didn't do this to show off. I did it because you and your wife made it your personal mission to harass me over something that was never yours. Karen scoffed. We enforce order. Without rules, communities fall apart. I laughed quietly. You don't enforce order. You enforce control. There's a difference. She crossed her arms, chin high. You don't know what it's like managing a neighborhood full of entitled people who refuse to follow the standards we built. Oh, I think I do, I said. You've been managing me without authority for months. Her face twitched a crack in the armor. I took a step closer to the table, laid down a small stack of papers of my own. This, I said, is a copy of the debt transfer agreement from Ridgeview Bank. It lists Clearwater Holdings, my company, as the note holder. The balance due, including interest, is $874,000. The HOA board members in the back gasped. Tom's knuckles turned white. You have 30 days, I continued calmly, to pay the full amount or surrender the property. If you don't, the marina, the docks, every piece of this operation becomes mine legally, permanently. Karen's lips parted, but no sound came out. One of the HOA members spoke up timidly. Wait, are you saying he owns the loan on this place? Tom turned on him instantly. Stay out of this, but the man shook his head. No, this affects us too. Karen told the board the marina was safe, that you'd negotiated with the bank. Another woman spoke up from the doorway. She told us the HOA funds were covering the marina taxes. That's why our fees went up. The room buzzed. Karen's head snapped toward them. That's not true, she barked, her voice rising. You don't understand the stop. I said it softly but firmly enough that the chatter froze. She looked at me, trembling with rage. I reached into my folder and pulled out one last paper, a ledger of payments, or rather the lack of them. Here's what I understand, Karen. You used HOA funds to float this failing marina. You overcharged homeowners, fined innocent people, and bullied anyone who questioned you. You called the police on me for parking a boat on my own lake, and now you're sitting here drowning in your own arrogance. For the first time, Karen didn't speak. Her expression was a mask, the face of someone who'd built an entire identity around control and was now watching it crumble piece by piece. Tom's voice cracked the silence. "So what do you want from us?" I looked him in the eye. "Here's my offer. You both step down from the HOA effective immediately. You issue a public apology to the residents and to me. In return, I'll give you a chance to stay on as Marina managers. Minimum salary, but at least you'll keep your home and some dignity." Karen's head whipped toward me. "You expect me to work for you," she spat. I shrugged. "It's that or eviction. Your choice." Tom looked between us, despair etched into every line of his face. "Karen, we don't have the money to fight this." Her jaw tightened. "We'll find it," Howie said, almost pleading. "We're broke. The HOA's broke. The Marina's a ghost town. He's got us cornered." Her voice went shrill. "No, I won't. I refuse to be humiliated by him." The thunder outside rolled closer, shaking the windows. The lawyer, clearly done, began quietly packing his briefcase. "You should take the offer," he muttered before slipping out the door. Karen stood up so fast her chair screeched across the floor. "This meeting is over," she shouted. "You'll regret this." Tom reached for her arm, but she yanked away and stormed out into the rain. He stayed, staring at the table for a long moment, the fight gone out of him. "Finally," he said softly. "She built her whole life around this place, around being in charge. She doesn't know how to stop." I nodded. "Maybe losing control is exactly what she needs." He sighed heavily. "If I take your offer, can I at least keep running the docks? I know every inch of this place." "That's all I want, Tom," I said. "Someone who actually cares about the water, not the power." He nodded slowly. "You'll get the resignation papers tomorrow." As he stood to leave, I looked out the window. Rain was pelting the water, each drop rippling across the surface like a heartbeat. The storm had arrived full force, but somehow I felt lighter. Karen's car peeled out of the lot, taillights vanishing into the gray. The HOA board members slipped out quietly, murmuring among themselves. They knew the reign of the Mitchells was over. And as the thunder rolled one last time, I couldn't help but think how poetic it was. The woman who once tried to control an entire lake now couldn't control her own downfall. When the rain eased and the clouds finally broke, the air smelled clean again. I stepped outside, boots sinking into wet gravel, and looked over the water. For the first time in months, the marina was silent. No shouting, no smug laughter, no orders barked through clenched teeth. Just peace. And that, I thought, was worth every dollar. For the next week, the marina turned into something between a ghost town and a courtroom. The storm had washed away the physical grime, but what it left behind was the kind that sticks to people: shame, whispers, and the slow realization that the emperor had no clothes. I didn't hear from Karen directly after our confrontation. Not a call, not a letter, not even one of her infamous HOA notices tucked into my mailbox. Instead, I heard about her through the grapevine. Word spreads fast in a small county, especially when someone like Karen finally stumbles. It started when 2 residents of Silver Ridge, the very same ones who'd been in the room that day, filed a formal complaint to the county office, alleging financial misconduct and coercive HOA practices. Within 48 hours, the county compliance division opened an inquiry. They contacted me, asked for copies of the evidence I'd mentioned during the meeting. I sent them everything: the ledgers, the letters, even the photos of her violation notices. David Ever, the strategist, told me to stay quiet publicly. "Let them fall on their own sword," he said. "The truth doesn't need your commentary." So I stayed on the sidelines and watched the collapse unfold like a slow-motion implosion. The first crack came when a group of HOA members demanded an emergency meeting. Karen tried to stall, citing procedural requirements, but when half the board showed up without her, they voted to suspend her powers pending investigation. She showed up late, storming into the room in a white blazer and dark sunglasses, pretending she was above it all. But everyone saw the tremor in her hands. When one of the board members read out the first complaint: misuse of HOA funds for marina property maintenance that didn't exist, the silence was heavy enough to drown in. "Those funds were allocated properly," she snapped. "You wouldn't understand the accounting." "Then show us," someone said. "Show the receipts." She didn't have any. Tom sat in the back, eyes down, saying nothing. It was the first time I'd ever seen him quiet in her presence. By the end of the meeting, she'd been voted out as president, a unanimous decision. They escorted her out like a disgraced official. She shouted about conspiracies, claimed I had orchestrated a coup, even accused me of bribing the county. But no one listened. The spell had broken. That same evening, I saw her SUV idling on the gravel road near my fence. She didn't get out. She just sat there for a long time, watching the reflection of my boat drifting calmly across the lake. Then she reversed and disappeared into the night. Tom called me the next morning. His voice was flat, exhausted. "She's not taking it well," he said. She's been talking about lawyers again, but they all want retainers we can't afford. The bank accounts are frozen pending audit. HOA won't even cover her legal fees anymore. She'll try to fight, I said quietly. Not for long, he admitted. They're filing a forfeiture on her business license, too. The county's investigating the Marina's tax records. She can't win. I heard a sound in his voice. I hadn't expected relief. Maybe it's time, he said softly. She built this whole thing on fear. Maybe it's time somebody else runs it with some decency. Later that day, the local newspaper ran a headline, HOA President under investigation for embezzlement and misconduct. The article quoted several residents, some anonymous, some not, describing her bullying behavior and pattern of intimidation. The part that struck me most was one line from a homeowner I'd never met. It wasn't about protecting property values. It was about control. She made us afraid to speak up. It made me think of all the times I'd just wanted to be left alone on my ranch, minding my own business, only to be dragged into her power games. The difference was, I could fight back. Most people couldn't. By Friday, the county seized control of the HOA's financial records. A forensic audit revealed nearly $180, 0 inches unaccounted administrative disbursements. A few of those checks led directly to Mitchell Marina. Others to shell companies registered under different names, all variations of Mitchco Holdings. It didn't take a detective to connect the dots. The following week, I received an official notice the foreclosure proceedings I'd initiated against the Marina were complete. Ownership of the property, docks, office, storage buildings was now legally mine. David called the same day. Congratulations, he said. You're now the proud owner of the place that made your life hell. Feels poetic, I said, but I'm not sure what to do with it. Do something good, he replied. That's how you close the loop. So I did. The first thing I did, as the new owner, was to make sure no one lost their jobs. The dock hands, the maintenance crew, even the old man who ran the bait shop, they all stayed. The only difference was that now they got paid on time. I fixed up the main building, repainted the docks, and put up a new sign, Clearwater Marina open to everyone. That phrase, open to everyone, hit harder than I expected. Because that was what Karen had hated most, the idea of equality. She wanted gates, fences, rules. I wanted water that anyone could enjoy. 2 days after the grand reopening, Tom showed up. He looked 10 years older, but strangely lighter, like a man who'd finally exhaled after years of holding his breath. I signed everything he said, handing me a folder. The resignation letters, the transfer papers. HOA's appointing new leadership next week. I nodded. You sticking around, if you'll have me, he said. I can run the docks, manage rentals. I know every inch of this place. I shook his hand. You've got the job. For a long moment he stood by the water, staring at the lake. You know, he said quietly, she wasn't always like this. Karen used to be decent. She cared about people. But power? He trailed off, shaking his head. It changes folks. Or maybe it just reveals them, I said. He gave a sad smile. Yeah, maybe that. That night I sat on my porch again, watching the sun set over the lake, the same lake where this whole mess began. The reflection of my boat shimmered under streaks of gold and violet, the water perfectly still. As the first stars appeared, headlights flashed across the dirt road. A car slowed, paused near my gate, then turned around. I didn't need to see the driver to know who it was. Karen. Her world was gone, the title, the influence, the followers, who once nodded at her every word. Now she was just another passerby, looking at something she could no longer control. I raised my coffee mug toward the retreating taillights in a silent toast. To peace, I murmured. The next week, the new HOA president, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Marjorie, stopped by the Marina. She introduced herself warmly, handed me a letter of apology from the board, and thanked me for restoring community trust. We want to make this place better, she said. Maybe work together, share the lake responsibly. No more fences. Sounds perfect, I said, and for the first time in months, I actually meant it. Business boomed. Families came to fish, kids splashed in the shallows, and laughter replaced the tension that had hung over the water for too long. Every now and then someone would mention Karen, always in hushed tones like a ghost story. But her power was gone. Tom became one of my best employees. He worked hard, never complained, and treated everyone with respect. Some evenings I'd see him staring out over the lake as if waiting for something or someone that would never return. I never saw Karen again, though. I heard she moved 2 towns over, sold her house, sold her car, and started over quietly, far away from HOA politics. Maybe she finally learned that control isn't leadership. And me, I learned that revenge, when done right, isn't about destruction. It's about restoration, about turning poison into something clean again. The lake looked peaceful that night, moonlight gliding across the water like silver threads. For the first time, I felt it not just victory but closure. The storm had passed. 1 week later, I walked down the newly repaired dock at dawn, coffee in hand, the air still cool and heavy with fog. The lake was glassy, a perfect mirror of the world above, except this reflection felt clean now, like the whole place had exhaled. The smell of cedar and gasoline mixed in a way that somehow made sense again. A few boats already bobbed near the marina, local families, early risers, fishermen who'd come to cast a line before the sun took over. Kids laughed on the shoreline. The same water Karen once called restricted now echoed with life. I'd spent the week repainting the marina, replacing rotten boards, fixing the fuel pumps, and setting up new lights. The old Mitchell Marina sign had been taken down and replaced with a clean, bold one that read, "Clearwater Community Marina Open to All." It wasn't just symbolic. I meant it. For years, the Mitchells had used the marina as a private gatekeeper's tower, charging outrageous docking fees, denying non-residents, and threatening locals who couldn't pay. Now the lake belonged to everyone who respected it. As I sipped my coffee, I saw Tom coming down the dock carrying a toolbox. He waved, looking healthier already. The deep lines in his face were still there, but the anger was gone. "Morning, boss," he called out. I shook my head. "Drop the boss, Tom. Just call me Marcus." He chuckled. "Habit, I guess. You got a minute, always." He handed me an envelope, a little crumpled from being in his pocket. "Karen signed it yesterday," he said quietly. "Final resignation from the HOA and the marina. She wanted me to give it to you." I opened it. Just one sentence in her sharp, familiar handwriting. For what it's worth, I was wrong. No excuses, no dramatics, no legal jargon. Just that. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Moved out yesterday." "Sold the house to a young family from Lincoln," he said. "She's renting a place near her sister's farm couple counties over. Says she's done with all this." I nodded slowly. "Maybe that's for the best," Tom sighed. "You know, she really thought she was helping people at first. Then she started believing her own rules mattered more than the people they were for." He looked out at the lake. "Guess power's like that. You think you're steering the ship, but you're just drifting." "Yeah," I said softly, "until the tide reminds you who's really in charge." We stood there a while watching the sun push its first gold line across the horizon. The fog lifted, revealing the lake in all its calm, endless expanse. I thought about how it had all started, just a boat, a petty complaint, a woman who couldn't stand to see someone else enjoy freedom she couldn't control. It seemed ridiculous now. But I also knew that if I'd rolled over back then, if I'd given her even an inch, she'd still be standing at my gate with that clipboard deciding who was acceptable. Sometimes the difference between peace and tyranny is just one person saying no more. Later that morning, the new HOA president Marjorie, the retired teacher with a backbone of steel, stopped by the marina. She wore a denim jacket, no clipboard, no entourage, just a smile and a box of homemade muffins. "Thought the crew could use a little sugar," she said, setting them on the counter. "You're already a better president than the last one," I joked. She smiled. "Low bar to clear, but I'll take it." We sat on the bench by the dock, sipping coffee and talking about small things, fishing permits, parking spaces, maybe setting up weekend community events. For once, it felt like we were on the same side. "You know," she said after a while, "Karen had a lot of people scared. Even me. I used to avoid walking by the lake because she'd come out yelling about lawn lengths and fence colors." "I believe it," I said. "She ran that HOA like a dictatorship." Marjorie nodded. "But the truth is, she only had power because we gave it to her. We all wanted someone else to deal with problems, and we forgot to keep her accountable." She looked at me. "You reminded us what that means." I smiled faintly. "All I did was park my boat." She laughed. "You did a little more than that." Maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't just about standing up for myself. Maybe the lake had become a kind of mirror showing everyone what happens when you let fear and arrogance dictate how a community runs. When Marjorie left, I spent the rest of the day helping Tom and a few volunteers clean up the last pile of scrap wood from the old dock. Every nail we pulled felt like erasing a little more of the past. By late afternoon, the marina looked alive again. Kids were running with ice cream cones, the smell of grilled hot dogs hung in the air, and the sound of water slapping against the hulls was almost musical. I walked to the end of the dock where my boat was tied. The same boat that had started all of this chaos now gleamed in the sunlight like a quiet reminder that patience, not rage, wins wars. Tom joined me, handing me a cold soda. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "Yeah," I said. "Better than good. Feels right." He nodded. "You know, Karen used to say this lake reflected people's character. Funny thing is, she was right. She just didn't like what it showed her. That made me laugh. Maybe we all get the reflection we deserve. As the sun dipped low, the sky turned amber and red, the whole lake catching fire in the light. I eased down into the boat, started the engine, and drifted out onto the water. The sound of the motor blended with the cicadas, and everything felt perfectly balanced, calm, alive, forgiven. Halfway across, I cut the engine and let the boat drift. The air was warm now, soft with that fading heat that comes after a long summer day. I watched the marina lights flicker on one by one. The laughter carried across the water, faint but comforting. I thought about my father who'd bought the ranch decades ago, always telling me, "Land doesn't just belong to you. You belong to it too. Take care of it, and it'll take care of you." He was right. I'd protected what was mine, not by force, but by understanding the system better than those who abused it. The marina, the HOA, the lake, all of it had become a living lesson about how power should work quietly, responsibly, and never through fear. As the last of the light faded, I turned the boat toward shore. The reflection of the dock lights shimmered like stars scattered across the water. Tomorrow, I'd open the marina for free fishing lessons. Next weekend, we'd host a small festival for local families. Things that brought people together, not tore them apart. For the first time in a long time, peace didn't feel like surrender. It felt like victory. And as I tied the boat to its post and stepped back onto solid ground, I whispered to myself, she thought she owned this lake. But the truth is, none of us ever really owned something that beautiful. We just get to protect it. The wind stirred softly through the pines, and somewhere across the lake, a loon called out, long, echoing, almost like a goodbye. I smiled, took one last look at the calm water, and walked back toward the glow of the marina lights. The storm was long gone, the lake was still, the story was over. But the peace was just beginning. This story isn't just about a boat or a lake, it's about standing your ground when someone tries to take what's rightfully yours. It's about how power, when left unchecked, turns neighbors into enemies and rules into weapons. And it's about remembering that true strength isn't found in shouting louder, but in staying calm, gathering facts, and letting truth do the heavy lifting. If there's one thing I learned from Karen Mitchell, it's that fear only works on people who forget their rights. The moment you stand up, even quietly, even alone, bullies lose their grip. So whether it's an HOA, a boss, or someone trying to control your life, remember, patience, preparation, and principle will always win in the end. Now it's your turn. Have you ever dealt with a Karen like this? Drop your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale of justice served cold, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more HOA stories that remind us peace belongs to the patient and karma never misses a deadline.